Welcome to the Underground, this is Chris. Today we're going to show you how to open and close your Ion or Congo Jr. to perform basic maintenance that can keep your console in good working condition. Modern ETC consoles use industrial computer hardware, and like your home computer, heat is the enemy for the electrical components inside. Months or even years worth of dust can collect inside and keep the components from cooling down properly, so it's always good to clean it out from time to time. The Ion and Congo Jr. use the same chassis, so the process for opening the consoles is the same. When working with circuit boards like the ones found in the consoles, it's extremely important that you ground yourself by touching the chassis of the console or other metal to discharge static electricity before touching the components, or you risk shorting something inside. The first step to opening the console is to remove the protective side panels and/or a fader wing from the console. The easiest way to remove those screws is to carefully turn over the console, and then you'll use a No. 1 Phillips screwdriver to remove the two screws holding the panels on. While you have the console turned over, this is a good time to loosen the 3 screws using the same No. 1 Phillips screwdriver closest to the front edge of the console. Turning the screwdriver approximately 2 full turns is more than sufficient. Next, you'll need to carefully turn the console right side up. Using a No. 2 Phillips screwdriver, there are 7 screws on each side of the console that need to be removed. Additionally, there are 3 more screws that you need to loosen. Like the screws on the bottom, 2 full turns is plenty. We've already removed and loosened the screws on the other side of the console to reduce the length of the clip a little bit. After all the necessary screws are removed or loosened, lift the back side of the panel upwards away from the base, and then slide the panel toward the front of the console. The face panel is connected to the base with several cables, so either set the face panel on its top to the side of the base, or stand it on its side if you don't have enough table space. Once the console is open, you might recognize a lot of the components inside if you've ever looked inside a desktop computer. In the back, on the right, is your power supply. In the middle of the motherboard is your CPU and RAM. In the back, on the left, is your I/O card. And below the motherboard is your hard drive, if you have an older version like this console. Newer versions of the console have solid-state drives instead of hard drives that are attached directly to the motherboard right about in here. To clean the dust out, we recommend using a can of compressed air duster from your local electronics store and blowing around all of the components, especially around the CPU heatsink. Do not turn the air duster can upside down, as this can expel liquid CO2 and can damage the electrical components. If there are large quantities of dust, a vacuum can be used in conjunction with the air duster. If your console moves around often, it's also good practice to make sure the SATA cables are properly seated if you've got an older version with a mechanical hard drive, as well as the RAM and all power connections. The SATA cable plugs into the back of the hard drive and the motherboard, and just check to make sure they're plugged all the way in. If you remove the cable for any reason, note that there's a small notch on the end of the slot in the connector and should only plug into the hard drive one way. At the same time, make sure all the power connections are properly seated to the hard drive and to the rest of the motherboard. To make sure the RAM is properly seated, you first need to remove the chip by pushing down on the latches on both ends of the RAM at the same time, and the chip will pop right out. If you notice any pitting on the brass connections, you can take a common pink eraser and rub it over the brass, and it will clean it like new. Use the air duster to make sure no eraser particles remain on the chip. Before reseating the RAM, make sure that the latches are still pushed down, and then firmly push the RAM back into the slot. The chip is notched on the bottom, so it will only fit in one direction. When the RAM is properly seated, you should be able to push the latches back up and into the curved notches on the end of the RAM chip. Once you've completed the steps above, you can close up the console by reversing the steps to open it. Putting the panel back on is the most difficult step. Roughly place the panel where it will go, and then push the screws you loosened on the bottom, which will create a gap that will allow you to slide the entire panel straight backwards where it will fall into place. Once the panel is back on, you want to use a number 2 Phillips screwdriver to put all 7 screws you took out on each side back in, and tighten down the 3 screws you loosened on each side as well. We've already taken care of the screws on the other side of the panel to shorten up the video a little bit. The last step in reassembling your console is to turn it over onto its face, and you'll start by tightening down the 3 screws on the front edge that you loosened using a number 1 Phillips screwdriver. Next, you'll slide the protective side panels back into place, and you'll put the screws back in to hold them in place on either end of the panels. After all the screws are tightened down, you can then flip your console back over onto its bottom, rehook it back up to your monitors and mice, keyboard, any other peripherals, and then the process is complete and you can continue to use your Ion or Congo Jr console. Hopefully this has been a big help. Thanks for watching.